Chris and Company rolls on, and so do the Detroit Tigers. Welcome into the newest episode of Chris and Company. I'm Chris Castellani. We will be joined today by Tony Garcia of the Detroit Free Press. He covers U of M sports for the Free Press, but I know he's also a huge Tiger fan, so we're going to be talking about all that. This should be a good show. He's kind of a jack of all trades journalist, which I greatly appreciate, and I appreciate him taking the time to do an interview for this show. But before we get to that, just a few things I want to get out of the way. Tigers are still rolling, and content-wise, Austin and I are going to be in Detroit for games 3 and 4. Going to probably be putting another vlog together. I encourage all of you, if you want to get caught up on the madness, you can follow me on Twitter at Castellani2014. I'm on TikTok at Chris Castellani. I'm on Instagram at ChrisCastle95. And of course, if you want to catch up on all the stuff on this YouTube channel, you can find all these videos, whether it's I'll Say This or Chris and Company. Hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and while you're at it, hit that little bell so that way you are notified every single time that I upload a video, so that way you do not miss anything. And also, before we go any further, we have a sponsor for today's episode. Today's episode of Chris and Company is brought to you by Elimitix. Have you received a traffic ticket? Don't have time to go to court? Simply upload your picture of your ticket today at elimitix.com and a lawyer will go to court for you. Elimitix has a no point promise. That means if you get any points, you get a full refund. The lawyers at Elimitix handle all traffic matters, including speeding tickets, DUIs, and even license restoration. If you need your ticket fixed, just click Elimitix or call 844-0TIX today. Thank you very much. Glad to have a sponsor for today's program. Check out Elimitix.com. Pretty cool thing, right? I mean, I'm naturally a perfect driver, so I never get ticketed for anything. But I'm sure there's many other people out there who can't be perfect like I am. So I recommend, if there is an issue, go to Elimitix.org, and they can help you out with all your ticket needs, so to speak. All right, that should do it for the prerequisites here. Like I said, go to Elimitix.org. Shout out to them for sponsoring this episode. Let's get to the interview with Tony Garcia. This should be a lot of fun. Chris and Company continues with another Detroit Tigers playoff edition, though we have multiple topics I want to discuss today as we are joined by this is a Chris and Company first, Tony, because I think this is the first time in which I've interviewed somebody on this show who has also interviewed me on their podcast in the past. It feels like, holy shit, forever ago, but it was not post-COVID, but not in the heart of COVID necessarily. You interviewed me prior to the 2021 Michigan basketball season, which literally feels like ages. I mean, we're talking about year 2 of the Juwan Howard era at this point, when things were fresh and hopeful. We talked some college hoops for a time, and now I'm happy to have you on. You've obviously grown a ton in your career, professionally and personally. So happy to have you on here, brother. How you been doing?
Thank you very much for that. I appreciate it. You know, I figured obviously you remembered that, but that was going to be one of the first things I brought up. It was, and it wasn't. I mean, it was Michigan hoops that I brought you on for specifically, and of course, I mean, you're one of our Tigers guys, and so we go to you for the Tigers content. But anyone who is a follower of your content knows how much Michigan hoops means to you specifically. So yeah, no. I mean, how many times has the world changed over since that last pod? Right? I mean, you were dumping beers on your head in the shower for torque in those days. Yeah. And, I mean, it was COVID, like you said, just. Who could have thunk it? But happy to be here. Thanks for having me, dude.
Yeah, of course. You know, it's a weird thing because the Michigan hoops market, at least in the way that like my following has grown, has not been tapped into, I feel like, necessarily. I've done some stuff with it, but like obviously people think of the Tiger stuff. And with Michigan football going on their run last year, people think of that. But like, I mean, there's a Trey Burke photo behind me for a reason. Like Michigan basketball, the Beeline era was like, you know, those are my teams. I mean, there was a pretty long stretch of time where like football wasn't too hot. Like they were the best game in town for a while, and hopefully, and we will talk about it at some point later in this episode. Hopefully, Dusty May can start to turn things around here for Michigan. But I want to start because obviously, you know, you cover Michigan sports for U of M sports for the Free Press, but I know you to be a huge Tiger fan. And I'm just going to start off by asking, it's kind of a broad question, but I think with this team, it's appropriate. have you ever in sports seen anything like this with a team that was, I would say, rightfully buried? Like, you see people digging up receipts, but I would say this was they 1 in a million opportunity where I'm giving everyone who was maybe wrong or being dunked on in this particular case a pass for burying this team. I mean, just how fun is it, and how did you have any idea?
Yeah, I mean, the fan side of you wants to dream, right? Like you want it, but the pragmatic part of you, the responsible part that is relaying what's happening to the masses, knows that you're gonna. I mean, you have to catch lightning in a bottle twice, right? Like once was not going to be enough. And I mean, one of my favorite recent developing stories, and I feel so bad for my boy Evan Petzold, who is our award-winning Tigers writer. I don't know if you saw this.
I brought it up in the intro for this podcast, or on the outro. He's on his honeymoon, man. So he's celebrating. He's having a good time. But yeah, I mean, I again can't blame him for scheduling it, thinking there's no way they go on this run. I'm sure.
Yeah, no. So I mean, I like when you look back, like I mean, the Nationals the one year were like 19-31 or something, 50 games in, but that's 50 games in. I mean, this was 110 games in, 108 games in, and they were 55-63. We've all seen what happens, but I just want to go. I mean, this is why we're here to talk about it. I want to make it perfectly clear that, like, yes, a lot of things had to happen, right? But I don't like the narrative that the Twins had to have this historic collapse, because the Tigers caught the Royals too. And yes, they ended up finishing behind them. They wouldn't have treated those last 2 days against Chicago the way they did. That's number one. But also, the team was like, yes, they were kind of punting. Once Flaherty went down and Olsen's getting hurt at the same time, it just looks like, I mean, they were not, this was not a, oh, let's go for it moment. I'm not saying it was. But if you just see the way AJ has overperformed with every team except 2022, right? And so if you know he's going to get the most out of it, and then you really finally lean into the matchups with slightly more competent players than Victor then I mean, you name him, right?
Take your pick. Yeah, take your pick from last year.
I didn't want to pick anyone out in particular, but I mean, Victor Reyes, like I said, Victor,
of course, yeah,
because I was mixing the two, but just so you couldn't have seen this, but now that it's happening, you understand why it's happening. I mean, they are on the right end of every matchup every time, and they make the opponent play on their heels. Nobody wants to play that way.
Yeah, we had Daniela Bruce on last week, and she brought up the point that I brought up coming.
Daniela Bruce.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
It's all about making these.
She's great.
She's bomb. Yeah, no, it's all about making these connections on Chris and Company. It's a little six degrees of separation. I love it. But she brought up the point that I think a lot of us said coming into the year, which is there is talent here, which I mean might seem kind of silly, but trust me, we've gone into some years where we looked at it and said, "Where's the talent?" Like I came into this year thinking I felt like last season, while they played well in the second half, that team probably overshot their projected record when you look at the Pythagorean, when you look at the win or the run differential. And this year, for a while, I remember thinking this team's probably better than their record. But there was a period I remember, and it's always those damn West Coast trips. So when we lost, I think the 3 of the first 4 to the Angels on the West Coast, thinking like these guys can't get out of their own way. And I think what it is, and I talked about it with Daniela as well, it's very comparable to the Lions, where I think that when you go to a new regime and you switch things over and you start anew like that, I think it really is kind of that 1.5 year mark where you start to notice kind of differences. You saw it with Dan Campbell where they were 1-6, just missed the playoffs, and then the next year they make it to the NFC Championship. I think this team, it really was that second half where you saw the development of Parker and the development of Colt. And then obviously the big thing was, and I remember coming into the second half thinking, I'm great, we're going to see some development, but they had 1 starting pitcher, 2 if you want to add Montero, who was pitching some good innings. The fact that they were able to call up these guys like Herter and Hannafy, who have all pitched incredible baseball. And that's the scary thing is like, typically I used to think like bullpen days were one of those things that were kind of, you wing it. Now, like I look forward to bullpen days. And I think other teams look forward to don't look forward to having to face the Tigers on bullpen days, because it was brought up in game 2 against the Astros. No Astros hitter faced the same Tiger pitcher twice. Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry.
No,
I think it's just what bullpen day has come to mean, or is very different things, right? A few years ago, the reason you're hating bullpen days is because you're throwing the Kenta Maeda equivalent, right? Just we need a human who has an arm that can put a ball towards the plate and just get us through this game. And if our offense scores 9 runs and we win it 9-7, so be it. Now, a bullpen day means We just got to find the right person to get us through the heart of their order. Then someone else go up facing the bottom of their order. And then once you're in a little bit of a rhythm, like, you know what I mean? You're not facing Jose Ramirez twice or anybody for that matter, Aaron Judge, whatever team you may be. I mean, we've all seen the way this formula has worked out. And I mean, I don't think anybody wants this to be the way that they win. You need reliable starting arms. However, I think I've heard you say it before. AJ Hinch has got to be the manager of the year. I mean, he's got to be. Just what he has done to pull string after string to get the buy-in, right? And I was just talking about someone with this earlier. If you think about like the last Tigers run that I mean, it was nothing like this, but that we all watched. I mean, you even got like, I was not a reporter at the time. I mean, I was younger, and so that was back in a different time. But just my understanding of it now, like, think about the infighting, right? Like, people cared about who the guy was, right? Within the staff. I mean, Max Scherzer, just the way he never getting the same love that Verlander got just because he wasn't homegrown. He hadn't done the same things. He had to go to AAA. It was different. But just the vibe, I mean, look at the vibes now. Nobody could, I don't know if this, I mean, could give a you-know-what less. I don't know if we're allowed to swear on this.
You can, yeah.
Okay, yeah, nobody gives a shit about who does what, right? It's just like, just somebody get it done. I mean, you've seen everybody play everywhere, everybody bat in every part of the order. AJ's not locked into these to anything at all except his belief of playing the matchups and that is what's going to win the day. And I mean, I've seen people. I've seen people calling him unserious, and the Tigers were doing unserious things. I remember one day specifically when they batted a whole bunch of righties against a lefty, like after Riley Green was coming back, and it's like, oh, like why? Maybe he knows more, right? Yeah. Like let's let. I mean, of all the people to let cook, he was the one to let cook, and I mean, and he is a 5-star Michelin chef.
He's been incredible. And I did talk about it in one of my post games, which is the manager of the year. I think is kind of it's not a silly award, but I think the way that the criteria is a bit silly, which is it's basically defaulted to the manager whose team surprises you the most. And in turn, because of that, I feel like Stephen Vogt probably ends up winning it. But if you watch the game in and game out strategy of the amount of pinch hitters we've used, the amount of different lineups we've used, the way that he's managed the bullpen, like it should be AJ. I just don't know if voters are going to take the time to really look at the kind of minutia of it. Yeah, I'm glad you brought up kind of the teams of the past, because look, at the end of the day, talent plays, and you want talent and you want stars on your team. And Dombrowski and Mike Ilitch were masters of that. But I do think that in that kind of 2010s era, yes, I think that egos were aplenty, which I mean, I do understand when you're talking about Cy Young winners and MVPs, or I mean, you literally have 2 Cy Young winners who are kind of jockeying for the same spot. And one of them at one point was going through contract negotiations as well, which was kind of bizarre shortly after Verlander had already gotten extended. I think that there is something really unique about a team full of guys who, I mean, let's be honest, most of these guys are like concerned if they don't perform, they might get sent down to AAA. Like that's how fresh they are at the big league level. And I think AJ does a great job of kind of alleviating that stress, but it's made the team as well, you know, a lot more fun to watch with all that late inning comeback. It's been remarkable. You know, another guy who's been remarkable from day one. This is the guy we have not been concerned about ever is Tarik Skubal. I mean, Tarik has been, opening day through 6 scoreless. And I mean, this is now with the postseason. I know the Cy Young's a regular season award, but this is becoming one of the great Tiger runs. And I've gotten a lot of questions on live streams about like, how does this compare to Verlander in 2011? And you were around for that. We both were. I mean, I was in high school at the time. And the way that I look at it now is like, they're very difficult to compare because the game has changed so much. Verlander threw 250 innings in 2011. That's never happening again. Like, I mean, I think there was one pitcher maybe that pitched 200 this season across all of baseball. But I guess I would argue Tarik in the 2024 world of baseball is every bit as dominant as Verlander was in the 2011 world of baseball. Different role. He's not asked to finish games, but for the 6-7 innings he's gone, there hasn't been anybody better in baseball in 2024. Did you kind of pick up on that? Do you agree?
I couldn't agree more. Now, I need to preface with Justin Verlander is my favorite athlete of all time. Same here. Yes. Any sport, anything ever. One of my hot takes, and this is the hottest take, but I'll share it here because it's what we're here for. Mm-hmm. And maybe it's a little tongue in cheek and it's a little like ESPN-y. And so like I get the pushback, but for my money, Justin Verlander might be the best pitcher of all time. Right, just with everything he's been asked to do. Like, I know that sounds ridiculous, but think about the numbers Kershaw and Scherzer were putting up right in the same era. How many of those years were in the NL? So 11% of their at-bats are against the worst hitter in a lineup versus a designated hitter, right? I mean, so his numbers aren't going to be it, but if you just think about it, so maybe he's not the best all time. For what I've seen, when I've needed anything, give him the ball, right? Yeah. I feel every single bit the exact same way with Tarek Skubal. If someone's on third, it feels weird if they score. If there's back-to-back hits, it was pretty strange. There are and you see how quick he works. I mean, there's as an infielder, there's nothing more you can ask for. He gets the ball, he goes. It's like the running backs who are running downhill. He is throwing downhill at you, down your throat. He has a put away pitch for the righty, for the lefty. He can go up, he can go down. It's pinpoint accuracy. He could go 110 pitches if they wanted him to. They just need to be more careful where they're at. Certainly he doesn't have a contract, so I guess now is when you might not need to be careful, but still do right by him, of course. Yeah. But no, it feels. I think you put it perfectly. The way they're used is the same or is different, but the feel is the same. I mean, if it's odd if they lose, it's odd if it's not a quality start. It's odd if they give up more than 2 runs.
And the way that they've turned, we've seen it here because Tigers are known for their pitching. The way that he's turned every 5th day into an event, the way that Verlander did with the must-see JV. I mean, it's awesome. And I think yesterday's game was kind of a prime example of his growth, which is, look, it's probably got to be easy when you know you have 100 in your back pocket to not just throw it all the time. And I remember when I talked to him being like, in the minors, I just blew guys away with heaters. And then the second I got here, you get humbled pretty quickly. And I think the fact that he can get into a situation 1st and 3rd, 1 out, and instead of thinking need a strikeout, got to throw 100, he's getting the changeup or a sinker, he's getting a ground ball and turning a double play. I think that's just his growth as a pitcher. He's such a ridiculous, unique competitor. And I would say while the offense came along and the pitching's been great, I would say he really kind of set the tone for this entire run because Tarek was the first time I'm trying to probably since Miggy at his peak, near the end of his peak, when people noticed there's a star in Detroit. This was where it was getting national attention. People were pissed, rightfully so, when he didn't start the All-Star game. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just gonna say that. I mean, he's and this is not surprise. He's. Nobody expected. I mean, the Tigers were dead and buried when he came back last year. But go back to the end of his season last year. I mean, and there's been bits and pieces. He's put it together. But you're right. It's his development. I mean, that's what happened. You see what Federer does with guys who come up from AAA and come in for a year or as a rental. How about working with someone with that talent, with that work ethic for that long? That's how you're going to maximize where he's gotten to. And Tarek Skubal he might be the best Detroit athlete since Calvin Johnson, I think. I don't know the last person who was this much better than everybody else. And everybody knows it, but it really doesn't matter. I was trying to think about it the other, and it's a weird comparison, but
but I guess if you're talking the 4 major Blake Griffin had a really great year in 2018 for the Pistons, but it sounds weird to put it this way. He kind of wasn't ours. I feel like he was a rental from LA and carried them to the playoffs that season. But I feel like there is something, and we felt the same way about Verlander. And I think that's one of the reasons why, as great as they both were, we were always more partial to Verlander than Scherzer. It's we drafted this guy, homegrown guy, watched his minor league starts. I think there is that kind of special connection of feeling like he's a part of it. And now they find themselves they're head back. Are you going to Game 3, by the way?
It's still in the work. I'm not working it. I may go. I don't have tickets right now, but I may just go down with some buddies. But I want to just build on that point just very quickly.
Yeah.
You're talking about how special it feels with Justin Verlander as a homegrown guy. Look at the entire roster. I mean, and even someone like Matt Vierling, who's not homegrown, he feels homegrown, right? Because you saw him he was not Matt Vierling. Matt Vierling is Detroit's Matt Vierling. You know what I mean? He was nothing in Philly, and that's a weird example. But every other dude here, even Trey Sweeney kind of now feels like one of the guys, right? But Colt Keith, obviously, Riley, obviously, we know where Spencer Torkelson is, but everybody when he comes up, everybody's still waiting on the moment. Everybody's still waiting on.
I still think he has one. I still think he's going to have one. And I really, this will be a conversation for another. I don't think he's the first baseman next year. I really don't. I think he's just struggled too much. But I've tweeted it before. I think on a long enough timeline, you give a guy enough opportunities, he's going to deliver at some point. Yeah.
It's the Jim Harbaugh method.
Yes, right. Keep it going. Yeah, keep it going.
Just run out the rope, and you can bottle it. I mean, when only when you're really talented, right? Harbaugh was a fantastic coach. Spencer Torkelson can swing the bat. He can hit the ball. It's in there, and so yeah. But you're right. Another topic.
I think the other thing that it speaks to, and it's something I brought up at the beginning of the year, but it's shined through in the latter part of this season, which is it's very clear that Al Avila's issue was not acquiring talent. I think that there was plenty of talent within his farm system, within even the major league teams over the last few years. His issue was the development of talent, and I think that that's reflected all across each level of baseball. I mean, I remember 2 years ago at this point, Jackson Jobe was being talked about as another potentially injury-prone big arm that's coming up through the system who's going to be a disappointment. And then literally a year later, he's top 5 prospect in all of baseball. Max Clark's ascending through the system. And I think when you see guys like Parker and Wencel Perez who've developed, I think that what Scott Harris has done a good job of is taking the talent that was acquired and just kind of mold and shaping them into the mold of player that he wants here. And I think it's a big reason why this thing has gotten off the ground a little bit quicker than some people thought. I don't think Avila, and I don't want to credit the guy, and I was around here for all 8 years that he was, but I do think that the cupboard wasn't completely bare, maybe in the way that we thought it was regarding talent.
I agree completely. And I mean, help me with the name. Who do the trade for the Rays for Austin Meadows?
Isaac Paredes.
Isaac Paredes. Thank you. I think he's the type of example, right? Like, I mean, there's just the Tigers had players who could hit. They couldn't develop them. You watch them go elsewhere, and then they match, right? And so no, you're absolutely right. But and now he didn't get. I mean, his talent acquisition was okay in some of the drafts. I mean, trades he was pretty consistently fleeced. I will say, but no, it was. I mean, clearly. Right? These are 90% Avila guys or 80% Avila guys. And then once you got different people in to, I mean, just whatever it is, whatever helped it click. Right. And like, that's the thing. Like, you'll never know what piece, like what layer of the development arc, like really flip the thing. Like, it's very easy to see how big of an influence Feder has at that level. Right. But there's people before that who are making substantial differences, and I don't know who it is, I don't know what it is, but it was clearly there was a change when Scott Harris came in, retooled. I mean, the Tigers front office, I mean, was archaic. Like, it was really, really old school. And now, like, yeah, the talent was there, but it would have been the same thing. Nobody would have seen any of the return on the talent. So yes, credit where it's due. These are not, like, a lot of these ball players weren't as bad as they looked, but they weren't looking good when you were in charge of them. And so it's good. I mean, so what a great marriage. Someone who could find it, and then someone else who can take it over the top.
And also, I think, at least when it comes to pitching, some of the, like, peppering in pieces that Scott Harris has gotten on 1-year deals, this is kind of the biggest difference to me between him and Avila's. Like, Avila's 1-year rentals weren't even good. Like, you're talking Tyson Ross and, like, an injured Matt Moore and Francisco Liriano. Right, exactly. Well, Pelfrey, they were dumb enough to sign for 2 years, only played one of them, and then we cut him. But, like, the fact that they were able to bring in, and I like him, but Michael Lorenzen was a completely mediocre pitcher his entire career, except for, like, the 20 starts he made for the Tigers. Flaherty was an afterthought. I mean, the Baltimore Orioles, one of my former coworkers at Barstool is a huge Orioles fan. They couldn't stand Flaherty. They ran him out of town, at the end of last season. He was great. He was great here. Like, I do think that's a huge, huge plus, similar to a team like the Rays or the Giants were like this in the past, where kind of that pitching factory. Yeah, you bring a guy to Detroit on a 1-year deal. Yeah, maybe the numbers aren't great, but potentially he can turn things around. That's always what Avila wanted, is we want the identity of this team to be our pitching. It's ironic that it took another regime to kind of drive that point home. It's been a lot of fun. This will be the last Tiger question, because right now I'm giving myself a minor pat on the back because I am enjoying the moment, which is sometimes difficult when you're this stressed out about a team. But I think the big question, regardless of how this ends, is what's the response going to be to this run by the front office? Will it be more apathy? Will it be little spending? I guess I'm not going to ask you what you think they do? Because nobody knows, and I don't even know if they know at this point. I guess by your estimation, what would an ideal offseason for you look like for the Detroit Tigers following this run?
I think if you do any part of, well, ideally all three of a sort of a 3-part plan, you'll probably be in really good shape moving forward. Add one more arm to the starting rotation, a legitimate arm. And I mean, I guess if you want to do the 1-year rental thing, and then you're probably not selling them, right? Like it would be, I guess it would still be a rental, like just a 1-year thing. That could be okay. But I mean, there's nothing wrong. I mean, the front office said, Scott Harris said, and ownership, Chris Ilitch said, when the core is here, they will spend around it. If this is not a core, then no core has existed.
There never will be.
Yeah. Right. So it's at least it won't be here, right? So that's part one. 2, I think, you need a right-handed bat. A lot of the Riley's lefty, Carey's lefty, Colt lefty, Parker lefty. I mean, the lineup. And so I think you need it. And I don't know if that's that's where it gets really tough. And that's why I'm so glad I'm not paid to make this decision. Is it third base? Is it shortstop? Is it first? I mean, I know we all really like Trey Sweeney, but what if you use Trey Sweeney as sort of one of these platoony type pieces, right? Like he can be a layer, but he's not your everyday shortstop. And then you sign Willie Adames, right, from Brewers or something like that. Or maybe he is your everyday shortstop, and then Alec Bregman and AJ Hinch reunite, right? I could even see Justin Verlander coming back as that arm. I mean, I think I don't know how you could write a better script than that. So that would be great. And obviously everybody loves what the bullpen has done, but I think another arm, I mean, just they don't have any lefties. So right. you need other than Holton, who I'll be annoying about this. You'll be annoying. I've been on Tyler Holton's jock for 2 years. I mean, since 2022.
Really?
I got emphatic tweets about, because there's something to me in sports that's so fun. Tarek Skubal is the most electric, right? Mm-hmm. It's not related. In some ways, it's not relatable because it's so dominant. It's like people just aren't like this. Mm-hmm. Tyler Holton could literally be cleaning my windows tomorrow. Like, right. And you would never know. He throws 90. He throws 91. He's got junk, and it's just he comes to the park. He gets you out at some point. He's not sure when, and then he goes home. And then he does it again the next day. And I love that lunch pail. So he's fantastic. Pay him whatever he wants. But they need a power lefty in the back.
I would agree. I think one that, and I think they fixed this, but in the early part of the season, one big issue that the bullpen was suffering from is there was not a whole lot of swing and miss. I think on a 1-year deal, he's still pitching good baseball. Aroldis Chapman being in that bullpen, I think, could make a lot of sense. He's still somehow throwing a 102, 103. You get Fetter in there. He's going to spin the ball. I don't know if it's the thing with him is like, I don't know where the ego's at. If he would have to be the closer, have to be the high leverage 8th, 9th inning guy. But if he's willing to adapt, I mean, there's a lot of situations you could bring him in and a lot of guys who wouldn't want to face him.
And how about I'm not here to say yes or no, but just, in Allen Park, right? There's a big character push, right? Mm-hmm. Or Aroldis Chapman would not fit the bill there. I think the Tigers are kind of the same. It'd be electric. That's a name to watch. I wonder.
Yeah. And that's a fair point. The only counter to that is I know that Scott Harris is a disciple of Theo Epstein, and Theo Epstein had his question marks about bringing Chapman onto the Cubs in 2016 and still brought him on, and they won the World Series. I think at first base, right-handed bat, I think Christian Walker makes a lot of sense because I don't think they want to commit for a long time to a 10-year contract with anybody, but Walker would be coming in first base, right-handed bat. He'd be 33, 34 years old. You can sign him to a 3-year deal, a backloaded deal with a high AAV. And yeah, you brought up Verlander, and I've heard people bring up Walker Buehler as well. But I also think one of the big things that would alleviate a lot of stress, Skubal, with him being a Boris client, Skubal's not going to do anything in terms of negotiations, I don't believe, until he hits free agency. Unless there's a miracle. Now, that's the biggest home run. If they're able to sign him long-term after this season, more power to you. I don't think Scott Boras will allow it. But I think one of the big concerns, understandably so, that we've experienced here over the last decade is we've seen so many great players come here and so many great players leave either through trades or free agency. I think you need to make an attempt to sign one of your young players to a long-term contract, whether that's a Green or Scooble or one of these, or Carey, honestly, if you want to sign him to a little extension, just to kind of send the message that, yeah, not only are we developing young players, we want to keep these young players. Because I think I hear that concern a lot. People are scared, like, what deal could they get Riley? Could Scooble be gone in 2 years? And yeah, I understand the criticism or the concern. But to me, that's the one thing Scott Harris promised, is like, we want to develop and retain young players. To me, it starts with that core.
And those are the three. The three. If there are three people in the organization to keep, you named them. It's Tarek, it's Riley, it's Carey. And so, and I mean, especially with I don't ever want to hear about money. I hate hearing about money in baseball. You know what? Pay them. You're one of the 10 richest owners, and there's no cap, and they're winning, and they're good. Pay them.
Yes.
Move it along.
That's the worst thing about this era. There's been this group of people that have become convinced that Detroit's a small market. It's like, dude, it's around a decade ago. We spent gobs of money on really good players. And that's like, and ultimately the whole small market, big market thing, unless it's Oakland, rest in peace, or Kansas City, who even they spent some money this offseason. The market is as big as your market is as big as what you make. I mean, San Diego had, I think, the 27th biggest TV market, and they have the second or third highest payroll. And guess what? They've been in the playoffs 2 of the llast 3 years, and they got the Dodgers on the ropes right now. Like, I think that a lot of that's kind of a fallacy. But look, obviously, it's incredibly exciting, and I would, to be able to enjoy and see the fans react in the way it has. It's been so cool. But I do want to move on to a team that a year ago had much better vibes than they do today. But obviously, one of your jobs is covering Michigan football, and I want to ask you about this. And I'm glad to have somebody on who, I mean, I guess you could probably say this about every guest that I have on, but who has a more level head than I do, because I'm a fan, and you're a journalist, and I mean that obviously with tremendous respect, because I don't get paid, but I do overreact. The way that I look at this Michigan football team is I'm trying not to look at them as the defending national champions and only compare them to the team that came before it, because you're opening yourself up to only criticism. You're following up a team that was literally perfect. They were 15-0. They didn't beat themselves. They didn't commit penalties. They didn't make a whole lot of mistakes. I'm just trying to look at this Michigan team as their own entity. And even by that standard, I feel like there's some very serious concerns that have arisen through the first 6 games. Am I overreacting, or are some of my observations and concerns legitimate?
I think that's all legitimate for this year. And for right now, I just want to I think it's always good to contextualize everything as best I can. Just like, I mean, that's just how as you try to look at it, that's just the way I try to look at things. And I think you're starting obviously in a perfect spot by saying, like, hey, this is not the reigning national champion. Like, that's contextualizing, right? And that's good. Like, and I'll take you one further, right? It's not this era. This last era of 40-3 over 3 years has never happened. That had never happened before. Michigan is the winningest program in the history of college football. They've never won 3 outright Big Ten championships, right? So everybody needed to, and then the conference expanded. Ohio State is on a 5-year run of being really upset. Oregon's in here now, right? Like, let's do some math here. Mm-hmm. So there was always going to be some coming back to earth. They lost the entire defensive coaching staff. They lost 10 starters on offense. They lost 6 starters on defense. Just on and on and on. There's a ton new here. Even with all that said, this is still disappointing. There's more talent. I mean, the unit should. Frankly, the most upsetting part is the quarterback, of course. And that's every bit. I mean, it's somewhat on Jim Harbaugh. Like all the way back then, but he was planning his exit. He was everything was focused on the national championship. So then what I say to myself is, if you're Sharon Moore and you kind of know you're the guy in waiting, or you're Kirk Campbell, and these guys who know they're about to be elevated and getting next man up, they needed to be making plans elsewhere. Somebody needed to come in anywhere. Look at who Minnesota got from New Hampshire, right? Or people bringing in transfers from Ohio. Anything would have been better than banking on Jack Tuttle, because Jack Tuttle was not healthy. That was their plan. He was going to be J.J. McCarthy light, not as good, but it's going to be the same formula. We've got an elite defense, and we can do a really similar thing, not quite as well. Then he gets hurt. They try to do it with Davis. The lights are too bright. Then they try to flip it with Orgy. everyone's just, I mean, they get 2 miracle wins. So then everybody packs the box, and it was just fool's gold, right? And like, I mean, if I were Michigan, I'm almost feeling better after the loss against Washington than I am after the win against Minnesota. And like, that's wrong because there's only 12 games and the name of the game is win at
I get what
any
you're
cost.
saying though.
But you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, it's just night and day. They're now, I mean, Jed Fish said it off at halftime on the NBC broadcast. He's like, yeah, you know, well, now we're going to have to play a real defense. He said, play a real defense because there's now an actual quarterback. That's just mind boggling.
Yeah, no. And that is where it starts. And it just goes to show, like, I will continue to be the biggest JJ stan ever because he added elements to that offense that no other quarterback they've ever had was able to do. And Anthony Broom, who I interviewed a while back, who brought it up, like on money plays, there was not a quarterback in the country that was better on third down a year ago. It's just he did a great job of extending drives, of making throws in, under pressure, getting out of the pocket. It starts with the quarterback. You're correct. But the point that you brought up of what they wanted their identity to be, which is get J.J. McCarthy light out of Jack Tuttle, run the football, and have an elite defense. Even if that worked with the quarterback position, I would argue the defense has not been nearly as elite as it's needed to be. And that I would say, is the most disappointing part of this team because the quarterback thing, like, we probably should have seen it coming. I knew that was going to be an issue from day one. They never really addressed it. And then Tuttle got injured. Now they're kind of in limbo, but this is a defense that a year ago had 13 players that were first, second, or third team All Big Ten. Like you said, they lost, I think, 6 starters, but that means you're returning 5 or 6 legitimately solid members of your defensive staff, including, you got first round picks here, 3 or 4 with Kenneth Grant and Mason Graham, and Will Johnson and Josiah Stewart's no slouch. What do you think is, and the penalties too, they've just been very disciplined. What do you think has been the reasoning behind the defensive step backwards? Because I feel like there's a significant amount of talent here and it hasn't really translated.
I do have a new working theory about this, and I want to get it in 2 parts. So One is they work hand in hand together, right? The offense, the defense, the time of possession, the special teams. I mean, it is all one. And Michigan was elite at controlling the time of possession and field position throughout this run. I mean, Tommy Doman, go all the way down to Tommy Doman, the punter, who is really struggling right now. I mean, he didn't have 150-yarder against Washington, and he only put 1 of 5 punts inside the 20. You're not flipping the field. Like, the defense is defending shorter fields. That's number one, and they're not as good. To your point, I'm not saying they're not. So if the offense is not, and like I'll go back to a couple games ago, not counting the kneel down, Michigan had 11 drives against Minnesota. 8 of them amassed 12 minutes and 43 seconds. You're on the field for a minute and a half at a time. I mean, the other 3 were 18 minutes, right? So you end up with 30 minutes of time of possession. But you can't have 3 functional drives and 8 3 and outs, or essentially what is effectively that. And so the defense is defending more, number one. And then here's the other part of what I'm trying to piece together, because I'm not a defensive whiz. I'm trying to sit down with Wink and watch some film. I mean, I was talking about it with him the other day. It might have to be more of an off-season project, just so I can like sit down with the guy, right, and really explain it. But here's my theory. Wink loves to talk about now how he's not just blitzing, right? He talks about their simulated pressures. He's like, it's not a blitz if you're only sending 4. So if I'm sending someone from the edge and dropping an edge, like he likes to drop Garcia into coverage. He likes to drop TJ Guy, Derek Moore, some of these edges into coverage. He's like, we're still only sending 4. It's not a blitz. That's true. However, if you are sending one of your defensive backs, there are fewer quick defensive backs in the secondary, more holes, more vulnerability. And then you're asking guys like Zeke Berry, guys like Jair Hill, who don't have the experience, who are not Mikey Sainristil, and who are not Josh Wallace, who, even though he came from UMass, he was an all-league guy there. He was a 5th-year dude. Mikey Sainristil was as good as Dax Hill as a nickel, right? I mean, and you're not replacing these same guys. And so it's the exact opposite of the Tigers is what I would say. Everybody's being asked to do just a little too much. Instead of everybody being in exactly the right position, you're putting Jair Hill on an island. You're putting Zeke Berry on an island. They both gave up 7 catches on 9 targets this last week for a combined 180 yards and 2 touchdowns.
Yeah.
And there's your defense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the secondary has been probably the biggest disappointment here. And obviously Will Johnson's great, though. Even he's had some, I think a few times where he's been put on an island. But that's a great point you bring up about the defense, because I feel like over the last few years, it started with McDonald and obviously Minter perfected it. They did a great job of simplifying a very complicated scheme. And in order to do that, you need really smart players. And you looked at the team last season, they didn't get penalized. They were incredibly gap sound. They didn't give up, they didn't give up a whole lot of big chunk plays. I think that the scheme potentially has gotten a little bit more complicated to these guys, and it just doesn't seem like they play as confident as they have in the past. And you brought up a really good point about the field position as a whole. Last year's team, there's nothing about last year's team that you look at and will stand out the way that like LSU's offense did in 2019. But what they were was just a complete unit where the offense complemented the defense complemented the offense, and special teams, like it was just kind of a perfect, like free flowing, thing. They were a complete unit. Whereas the amount of stops and starts that they have offensively has been maddening. And I want to go back to the quarterback thing real quick, because I had heard through the grapevine that Tuttle was going to be seeing some playing time against Washington. And I remember thinking, at this point, fuck it, fine, sure. We'll roll the dice, see what happens. My question is, and maybe you don't know the answer, but why didn't they just start him? Because you spot him a 14-point deficit, and while he did commit those 2 huge turnovers, he made some plays. He gave them that spark in the first half. It's like, this could have been a 17-7 or 21-7 game at halftime, and you wouldn't have had to worry about those fourth quarter turnovers. You kind of put him in a vulnerable position. What was the reasoning behind even giving Orji a shot?
No, that is the main question. That was one of my, post game when I do my grades and things, that was the main knock on coaching. I gave him a D just because it made no sense. I just could not fathom. I don't know what you saw in those 3 drives from Alex Orji that did not look exactly the same as the first 2 drives. And the main point is, if Tuttle was healthy enough to play and you were ever going to play him, why? You asked it. Why wasn't it immediate? And the last, Michigan, and that's what I asked Sharon. That's what I asked Kurt Campbell the past few weeks when we speak with them. It's like, you never apologize for a win. And I totally hear what you guys are saying, that like, hey, we're going to win by any means necessary. But what happens if you can't win by any means necessary, right? Are you just like saying, like, not are you? I knew the answer, but I'm trying to be respectful and like give them the opportunity to explain themselves. Like, are you just saying we can win any means necessary? Like, there's no proof that you can throw the ball. And so what happens if you're not up 14-0 or 24-3 in the third quarter? If you're ever behind in the game, how do you expect to come back? And because even last year's team, like, while they were almost always up, I don't think that they didn't score first every game. Like, right. They were fine. 14-15, but right. Not everyone.
They were down early against Rutgers. They were down early a few times, but yeah, and of course there was the classic.
I don't think they ever trailed in a second half until Alabama, though.
You're probably right, but when it mattered, they had to make. You're right. They put together a drive that was a legacy drive for that team that if the roles were reversed, there's no chance that happens with this current unit. Not even close. Yeah, it's bizarre because even some of the wins. I remember the USC win. There were some people being like, "Hey, that's potentially a signature thing." USC was 11, I think, at the time. Looking back on that, you got a Herculean effort from Mullings in the fourth quarter, really throughout that entire game. You played a great first half. That was really the big thing that kind of carried them. But dude, they got punched in the mouth the entire second half of that game. And I think, as we've learned over the last several years, like, when it matters, Lincoln Riley coughs up games. Like, I didn't come out of that ball game being like, here's a turning point. I guess the only logic that I can think of regarding the quarterback situation last week, and the only thing I can compare it to, is I remember in 2017, they kept giving John O'Korn chance after chance. And then there was the game against Rutgers where I think the idea was like, it's Rutgers. Like, if he can't get going here, he's not going to get going at all. And so they brought in Peters, and while Peters wasn't very good, it was they gave him some sort of spark, and they won a few games in a row. The difference is a Chris Ash-led Rutgers team is much different than Jed Fish, coaching Washington. Like, I think that they needed a shorter leash. It didn't make any sense, and yeah, it ultimately killed them. I guess, in terms of where this team goes from here, obviously expectations have changed, but do you feel like within the locker room there's tensions or frustrations, of course, but like that there's any sort of divide, or do you feel like the team is still relatively together? They're just kind of struggling.
It kind of feels like it's maybe starting to teeter, right? I mean, think about it. These guys haven't lost. I mean, you got fourth year guys who haven't lost 2 games in their whole career, right? This is a completely, or third year guys, I should say, this is a completely foreign concept. And Mason was talking about it after the game. He said, like, the main job of the bye week is to make sure that this doesn't tear us apart, that this brings us together. And so, I mean, I think they've got a ton of talent. I think they've got a lot of good leaders within the guys who you can just say, do what they are doing. But here was always my rub. I don't know that they have enough vocal leaders, real vocal leader. And it's maybe this is a Michigan State quarterback who said it, and he's not a very good quarterback now at Auburn, in Peyton Thorne, but it doesn't make the point less relevant. And for all the coach speaking, all the crap I hear, this is one of the better points that I've ever heard in one of these settings. He said, leading by example is a prerequisite. All that means is you're doing your job. You can't tell me, oh, how are you a leader? Oh, yeah, I kind of lead by example. Okay, cool. So you're trying. But what do you do that is actual leadership, that goes outside your comfort zone, that elevates others, not just doing your thing? I don't know who that guy is. I think it would have been Rod Moore. And Rod Moore's injury cannot be overstated on what it did to this secondary. I mean, Wink Martindale called him Eric Weddle. I mean, we met with him in February. He's like, dude, this dude's like Eric Weddle. Like, he just gets it. I mean, I think he might have worn the green dot instead of Ernest Hausman. He might have had the headset, even from the back end, and called all the checks. He's that good. And so, I mean, as far as going forward, I think you might have, I mean, if I'm diehard Michigan fan and I'm trying to best case scenario this, it's the ultimate championship hangover. Everything went wrong. I mean, we think about how hard this offseason was, right? Like, JJ kind of was up and down. Jim was kind of up and down. You got all these investigations hanging over our head, right? The conference is changing. I mean, everything was built towards last year. No matter what happened, this was always going to be a coming back. No matter anything, even if Jim came back, it was not going to be 15-0. And so, although he was never coming back, that's just, he wasn't. I hate people who say he was going to get a contract in September. No, he wasn't. No, he was not. But just, I mean, so you have to hope that this is a 1 year, this is just the bottoming out, right? Everything went wrong. A lot worked. And really they're working behind the scenes to kind of shore things up for next year. That's what you got to hope. However, Mason's leaving. Will is leaving. KG is leaving. Colston is leaving. Donovan, who I've never been a big fan of, but he's been better this year than last year. He was horrendous. He's leaving. Mullings is leaving. It's just, and there's, and something we didn't mention with the offense, it's not just quarterbacks. This might be the worst group of Power 5 or Power 4 wide receivers I've ever seen in my lifetime.
Wow.
I mean, I don't know. Their leading receiver has 12 catches for 72 yards in 6 weeks.
No, I tweeted.
Colston Loveland has missed a game and a half and has 2 fewer receptions and 18 fewer yards than everybody in Ron Bellamy's room combined.
Yeah. Wow. I tweeted it out after Saturday's game. The numbers. Samaj is the leading wide receiver on the team with the 12 catches. This is a Brian Ferentz offense. This is we use our tight ends on bootleg passes and we run the ball and try to shorten games. The one defense is do you think it is that the receiving room is that weak, or is it just they don't have guys who can get him the ball?
I think it is one of those classic. It is both. I mean, it's gonna improve with Tuttle. It will improve with Tuttle.
Yeah.
But I had my reservations about this when they were. I mean, and when I say a lot of these kids are good, a lot of these players are good kids, good athletes, and maybe just being asked to do a little much right now, and maybe they could succeed elsewhere. And I want good things for all these people, and so this is not individual things. But when I'm hearing that Tyler Morris is the alpha in the room in the off season, my red alert, I mean, it was like sirens blaring. When you only have 5 scholarship receivers in the spring, you say you're gonna make some moves, and those moves are adding Amarion Walker, who you had kicked out of the room the year before, and a receiver from Youngstown State who'd never had more than 500 yards at that level. What was gonna happen? Who is gonna make a play? I mean, Tyler Morris had 1 touchdown in 2 years, and that's when he was working with his high school quarterback.
Yeah.
It's just there's I mean, and then 3 games with Alex Orji not throwing the ball at all obviously didn't help.
Yeah, no, it's that's the most frustrating part to me. Is I think the Big Ten as a whole and conference expansion has a lot to do with this. Just looks better across the board. Like, it's not just coming down to Michigan, Ohio State, and maybe Penn State. Like, Indiana has better athletes to me right now offensively than, I mean, you talk about some of the other, but like Signetti's legit. Like, they're actually have a legit chance of making the playoff with the 12 team. I know that sounds crazy, but that's the most surprising part to me. Is you would think a team coming off of the run of success that they've had would be able to bring in, whether it was portal or recruitment wise, better athletes. And it just doesn't seem on that side of the ball, like outside of Loveland, who's great. Like it's really, and Mullings occasionally, it just doesn't seem like it's there. So yeah, I mean, things are going to get worse before they get better because they play a lot of good teams coming up. I mean, the only game that I feel like I look at and go, okay, that's a W, is Northwestern at home. Besides that, like Indiana's a losable game. Illinois is losable. We know about Oregon and Ohio State. This could be a 6-6, 7-5 football team.
I'd still put Michigan State in that gonna win category. A few weeks ago when it was Orgy, I was kind of on the fence, especially because Michigan State was still on the up and up. I get that Ohio State and Oregon are going to blow a lot of teams out, but I mean, they didn't play again. Like, I try to watch the Big Ten when they're not playing adjacent to Michigan, and I watched a lot of Michigan State the last 2 weeks. They just turned the ball over. So
I was going to say
one thing that Michigan can make you pay with.
I was going to say that they probably don't match up well against this Michigan team because this is a Michigan team that will beat you by forcing turnovers, and a Michigan State team that shot themselves in the foot a million times. I could still see a future where, like, you know, if there is just that game where Childs is controlling the ball, like they can sustain drives and they can be explosive. Like, it's not, it ain't last year. Like it's a losable game. Them playing at home, I think you're probably right, does give them the edge. But I can't call it a guaranteed W. But I think they probably would win.
Right. No, I took flack last year. I picked. I mean, I went to Michigan State, and a lot of my old roommates and friends, I mean, they were not pleased. I picked Michigan to win like 45-6, right? And it was worse. And it was worse than that. On their end, or better than that, depending on how you look at it. And so, but you're right. This year, Michigan State could win that game, but I don't think they do. But you're right. I think they lose to Illinois. I really think they're gonna. I think they're gonna lose. In Indiana, 50-50. I know Indiana's real hot right now. I wonder what it looks like come November. But that's a very losable game, and they're certainly going to lose to Oregon and Ohio State. Yeah,
this could be Indiana. Like, it's a fun story, and I do think Indiana football is on the up and up more than they've been outside of the fluky COVID year. But it is they're kind of reminiscent of that Minnesota team in 2019, where their schedule just opened up and they were like 9-0, 10-0, and then when they kind of had to play some big boys, it looked it didn't look so great. But I want to move on. The last thing I want to talk about with you is Michigan hoops, because obviously a new era beginning with Dusty May. But before I get into that, I guess. At the beginning of the show, we talked about the last time that we talked was about the heart of the Juwan Howard era, year 2, which was what's so bizarre to me about the Juwan era is that you look at it on paper and you say, okay, it's something that it didn't work. It was an experiment that didn't work out. But what's strange is that for a while, it was not only working, but working out incredibly well. He was National Coach of the Year. And I understand the 21 season was weird with COVID and no fans. That roster was really good. And they were top 15 in offensive and defensive efficiency. They were a 1 seed in the NCAA tournament. I legitimately think even under regular circumstances, that's a team that could have made a run. So when you kind of do the breakdown, the autopsy of the Juwan Howard era, where in your mind did things go wrong?
Man,
where does it start?
It really feels like a where does it start sort of thing, because I was around for the last 2 years, and what I saw, and again, I'm just the first Big Ten team, the first Power 4 team I covered was Michigan State, right? So a couple years of watching how Izzo runs a program, and then I watched what Juwan did. And it was really, I wondered how anything ever went right before. That's where I was. I'm not kidding. I'm not kidding. We were doing, and like, this is not about media, but this just is like, it's so representative in my mind of the approach that Juwan Howard took to this program. Media availabilities in 2023 and 2024 were still on Zoom. Right? Like, he's not having you come in. There's no connection. He has no like desire to answer questions or explain, like people with actual valid trying to, like, look at what Dusty May is doing with the outreach with the frats, and you know what I mean, and like involvement with the fan base. There was none of that. It was total disconnection. And then this is not to mention him, smacking assistants of other teams, him getting in a screaming match with John Sanderson, who was the lifeblood of the program, between John Beeline and these programs. And back to that point about the media availabilities, he would answer these Zooms that we would do. He would come on 2 or 3 minutes late. And like you see how it says Tony Garcia right here, Chris Castellani. Mm-hmm. It would say Jet's iPhone. He would take them. He took a call from his car. He took a call from the barber. He took a call on his son's phone. This is. I said people were talking about unserious. That was unserious. Yeah. He was entirely unserious. He let his son. Jace is and Jet. Well, when we spoke with him, was pretty good, and he did right by us. Jace is very mature.
He's great. Yeah, no, I've interacted with him too. He's wonderful. Yeah.
And so I don't know how it happened, because it's just the way that there was no example. There was no example set within the program from the coaching level. And I talked to other people affiliated with other people were hamstrung, right? Like, you have to keep the messaging has to be consistent. But when the messaging from the top is not great, even if you had good other assistants, Sadie Washington is going to do very well in these things. Phil Martelli is one of the better minds of the last 25 years, right? These are good, and it looked like that. And so it's just there's and even all the way down to how he handled the portal, right? You cannot be having like other people are going to blame Michigan's administration and Ward and admissions. And maybe there's blame to go around for these elite basketball players not getting in. It is Juwan's job to know before you do all that, you have to do your due diligence to see if they're going to get in. You can't go that far down the road and then find out and get caught with your hands behind your back, right? And then have no backup option. And you can't let your son get away without playing defense and without rebounding. You can't hold people to different standards. You can't only try to do things one way. You can't have no friends in the media. And then when everything falls apart, nobody's going to bat for you. Yeah. And so I know that was a long answer.
No, I appreciate it.
I think people don't know how bad it was the last 2 years. There are people inside the program who are supposed to be there every day who were not allowed at practice, because they were not friends with Juwan. It was the most toxic I could ever imagine.
You could tell, even as an outsider's perspective, how ugly it was getting. And I think that when you look at sometimes success is the worst thing that could happen to a person, because I think that what Juwan did when he first arrived was, look, man, I haven't run a program before. And like you just mentioned, Sadie Washington and Phil Martelli, bringing those guys, keeping Sadie and bringing in Phil Martelli as basketball minds, smart guys. I think they did a good job of kind of filling in the holes that maybe Juwan couldn't fill. And then you pop off in year 2. And he's National Coach of the Year. People are singing his praises. He gets an extension. And I think at that point, there's kind of a emperor has no clothes situation where it's like, what I'm doing is going to work because it's worked in the past. When in reality, it was a completely different team. I think in a lot of ways, they got very lucky in year 2, in the sense that was they might not have played together a ton, but that was a really experienced group with Wagner and Livers, and you had really good leadership with Chaundi and Mike Smith. I think that Chaundi I loved. And I think that what happened the next season, this is kind of where I started to scratch my head a little bit, was they really made a big deal out of Musa and Caleb Houston coming to Michigan, which I understand they were 5-star recruits. And just not a particularly memorable tenure for either one. They were fine. They were okay, but they were completely forgettable players that then went pro after a year. And I think, and this is kind of where we'll transition to the Dusty May side of things, I think that college basketball landscape has changed a little bit, where maybe a decade ago, it was so important bring in 5-star guys. Who cares if they're one and dones? We saw it at Kentucky in 2012, and we saw it with Duke in 15, these young teams with first, second year guys that won national championships. When you watch the tournament now, it's teams that have 3-4 year guys, grad transfers, transfer portal guys that are winning because they've played together more. And the big thing that Dusty May has talked about is player development. Like, well, yeah, of course you want talent. Of course you want 5-star guys, but you want guys that are going to get to know each other and understand the system. I guess there's probably a lot, but just from what you've seen up to this point, even if you haven't watched them practice, just the general vibe, what has been the biggest kind of night and day difference between the way Dusty May is going about things versus the way that Juwan did?
Yeah, we will get to see a practice next week, Friday, media day. So that'll be good to see them all together. But it's just, I think it's just this collective approach. Everybody, like, it's you're going to have a lot, Chris. You're going to have a lot of fun this season.
I think so too. Yeah, I'm excited.
I really think you're going to enjoy it because it's kind of like this Tigers thing. It's going to have to be everybody buys in, nobody's above it. On any day, it's going to be anyone. You're going to fill your role, and you're going to get yours. And you there's no great player. It's a lot of really solid players, a lot of experienced players on this roster who look and that's another thing. Like and not to harp on the past, but just as we make the comparison, there was just the roster construction made absolutely no sense. Under Juwan Howard. How many undersized fours who couldn't shoot? T. Will, you got, Jace, Will Cheddar, who's a good player, good guy, good guy to keep. But just, still limited, still what he can do. Like, so many guys in the same, doing the same thing. And so this, you can just see all the pieces. They got size everywhere. They got speed everywhere. They got length everywhere. They got shooters everywhere. It's positionless basketball. Yes, Trey Donaldson is the point guard, but the point guard does not necessarily have to set up this offense. It's going to be free flowing, go, move, and fill a spot and find shooters and use 2 7-footers to mess with other teams' formations. I don't think that's going to clog things up as much as a lot of people do. I think Danny Wolf is going to be the MVP of this team. That's just what I've been hearing. It's going to be so even. It's going to be so even. There are going to be so many dudes who do a lot, but just that got imagine Will Cheddar, a little longer, a little better, and just a little bigger, right? And who can put the ball on the deck. This guy, he can play inside and out. He can drive. They're gonna have matchup nightmares everywhere for opposing teams. It's kind of like the Tigers. You might see different starting lineups again on different nights, depending on who the team is. They can go small and they can go Trey Donaldson and Namari Burnett and Reuben Jones, and then Cheddar at the 4 and Vlad at the 5. Or you could go with some huge lineup and have Trey and Roddy Gale and Sam Walters, who's 6'10" at the 3, and Danny Wolf, who's 7 foot at the 4, and then Vlad Golden, who's 7'1" at the 5. Right? You could presume, and 4 of those guys can shoot. So there's so many different ways that they can make this. I think they might be one of the more underrated teams in the Big Ten this year.
I hope so. Look, he's done a regardless of how it goes. I respect the hell out of the guy for not being not taking it lying down. Let's go out, let's build a team through a portal. I get it. It's a lot of Band-Aids, but it's pretty damn good Band-Aids. I think he's done a pretty remarkable job there. And, one of the things, going back to the Juwan era real quick, I knew, even if things went well, that the defensive units that Beeline had near the end with Yaklich just that wasn't going to happen under Juwan. What surprised me so much is that towards the end, Michigan had no set offense at all. It was, let's let Doug McDaniel dribble for 25 seconds of a 30-second shot clock, and then somebody shoots a 3 and usually misses because, like you said, with the construction of the roster, they didn't have any shooters. I just think that the fluidity of how they play is going to be so night and day different compared to the last several years. You have experienced players. Yeah, no, I think it's a good place to be in for a first-year coach because you're kind of playing with house money. You have the potential to fly under the radar. And I think that Michigan basketball, in a much different way than football, is is at their best when they're at their quietest. And I think that has the potential to be the case with Dusty May. And ultimately, like, that was the guy who I wanted from the beginning, just in the sense of, like, dude, I'll be real with you. I didn't know Florida Atlantic had a fucking basketball program until like 3 years ago. And like, you take a program like that to the Final Four, you can't tell me that he doesn't have some idea of how to run a program. And it seems like we got
just look at his pedigree, right? He started as student manager at Indiana, right? UAB, Florida, FAU. He's climbed the ranks. He's done Power 5 programs. He's done small programs. He's been a head coach. He's been an assistant. He's been a GA. He's been a student. He's seen every level and every angle of Big Ten or of college basketball. You know what I mean? And I think that is one of the starkest differences, if we are of the two. Jawan, an unbelievably talented player, who was just a 5-star, who then became a player coach, who's a relatable guy, right? Like who could. He's from Chicago. He was supposed to have recruiting chops. Had a kid who was on the AAU circuit. There was a lot of things that were supposed to happen. He didn't know how to construct a roster.
Yeah.
He didn't know how to. The last question I asked Juwan Howard after they got bounced on the first night of the Big Ten tournament as like a 13 seed, and there was no disrespect in this question at all. It was, what is the identity of your program? Because there is none. Even Michigan football, as bad as it is right now, you know what they're trying to do.
Yes.
You know what they're trying to do. I literally, that's not hyperbole, I literally couldn't tell you Michigan basketball's plan. Mm-hmm. I have absolutely, there was no, they did nothing schematically on defense. They ran few sets on offense, none that worked. They were horrible out of bounds. They were, their record in one possession games in the final 2 minutes, there's no more evidence of a badly coached team than every single step of what Michigan did. And as painful, you'd rather get a root canal than watch that team last year.
I'm with you.
And it's going to be so much better this year. It really is.
It's funny, man. You're talking to the guy who watched almost every inning of a 114 loss team in the Tigers 5 years ago, and yet it was last year's Michigan basketball team where it's like, I got to turn this shit off. Like, there was something so, and I don't want to rip them too much, but there's something so remarkably unlikable about the way that they played. And you're right. Last year was the bottoming out, but in the 2 previous years, they lost every single coin flip game that they could have lost. And ultimately, we're probably talking about a completely different era if half of those games, they're able to close it out, hold on to a lead, make one more shot, make a few more free throws. But the money time plays where guys like Izzo have thrived in big situations, he completely faltered. And hopefully Dusty can start to turn things back around. I am looking forward to it because I do have a lot of love for Michigan basketball, and I do think he's going to do a great job. But speaking of doing a great job, appreciate everything you've been doing, man. Obviously, with the Free Press, and you came from Lansing as well with your last gig, which I appreciate as a Lansing kid. But no, look, man, it's been awesome. Obviously, starting we talked 4 years ago and seeing the kind of come up that you've been a part of, and always rooting for guys like you and Evan, young dudes who've been grinding for a long time. And I know you're having fun with the Tigers run, but I appreciate the job you're doing with Michigan stuff as well. I can say this as a Michigan fan, not always the easiest fan base to deal with. And so I'm sure you've had to learn that the hard way to navigate through those muddy waters. But I think you've done a wonderful job. And beyond that, I just appreciate you being on the show and being a cool dude. So thank you so much for doing this.
Yeah, no problem, dude. Thanks. Our like social media and like sports friendship that's formed this way is enjoyable. And you talk about me. Dude, you built your own brand, so I've been a long fan. So glad that I can return the favor a little bit. It's been years overdue. I told you that day. I was like, if ever I can. So we'll keep doing this. It'll be fun.
Of course. No, we'll have you on again. And real quick, just could you plug your social media for anyone who wants to find your stuff?
Oh, absolutely. At real Tony Garcia, because there are so many imposters. But Twitter is probably the main one. It's the same on Instagram, but that's more personal. I don't think anybody gives a shit about that. But yeah, so at Real Tony Garcia, subscribe to the Free Press. And we have our own podcast as well. Hail Yes. It's on anywhere you get your podcasts. You can listen to it after Chris and Company. 5 stars, rate, review, subscribe, all those things.
Awesome. Appreciate it, man. I'll talk to you real soon.
Later, bro.
Thank you so much to Tony for joining the show. He's an ultimate dude. I mean, I've known of Tony for a while. I know he was in Lansing for a minute, but talk about a guy who's got his life together, man. Married man, or is he engaged? Jeez, I should know this shit. I'm such a bad friend, but killing it with the Free Press, and obviously, starting to make waves. A lot of really great young journalists over at the Free Press with him and Evan Petzold, who obviously does a wonderful job. To talk about a married man, he's currently on his honeymoon during this Tigers playoff run, and he will be on this show at some point in the future. Huge fan of his, and I know those two guys are friends, so they've done a wonderful job, and I appreciate Tony coming on to the program, and it seemed like we kind of matched each other's vibe in the sense that we're both still reeling in a good way from this Tigers playoff run, but the thing is, this is one thing I've forgotten about. When your team is making a run in October, sleep is a gift. And it comes at a cost, I would say. It's at a premium. And that's fun, right? Because your team is in it. But stress levels are quite elevated. But Tony obviously continues to do a great job covering U of M, and it was great to talk Tigers with him as well. He will be on the program again at some point in the future, unless he hated it and never wants to come on again. If that's the case, then my apologies. But shout out to him. And that will do it for today's show. You can follow me on Twitter at Castellani2014. Just want to shout out one more time. Go to elimitix.org. Shout out to today's sponsor for all your help, your ticket needs, so to speak, and they will help you out with that. The link to where you can go to that website is down below and will be in the description for this video. If you're watching this on YouTube, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, click that bell notification. That way you are notification. I'm just going to keep saying it every single time that I upload a video to YouTube. You can find us on Apple Podcasts. You can find us on Spotify, and I can find you in the deepest depths of my heart because I appreciate all of you for being so supportive during what has been a pretty magical Tigers run. I hope this doesn't end. We'll be back next week with another interview. No guest is lined up yet, though I have an idea of who I want it to be. I'm not going to spoil anything, but thank you guys so much. Go Tigers forever and ever. Let's beat Cleveland. Let's not go back to Cleveland. Let's win the next two in Detroit. All right. Love you guys to death. Have a great rest of your day. Peace and happiness.
We're all behind our baseball team. Go get 'em, Tiger. World Series bound and picking up steam.